The Omnipotence Paradox. The Omnipotence Paradox is a philosophical question that challenges the concept of God's omnipotence with the question, can God create a rock so heavy that he alone cannot lift it? This question is often used to test the limits of logic in defining infinite power. In scholastic philosophy, Thomas Aquinas, through his Summa Theologica, explained that omnipotence means God's ability to do everything that is logically possible in accordance with his divine essence. Actions that are inherently contradictory, such as creating a square circle, are not part of such power because they do not reflect a possible reality. Philosophers such as C.S. Lewis support this view, stating that God is not subject to absurdity or logical contradiction. From a historical perspective, Gottfried Leibniz adds that the universe was created as the best of all possible worlds, and so questions of this kind are considered irrelevant to the divine nature. This paradox, although often considered disturbing, helps to clarify the boundaries between human logic and transcendent divine existence. In conclusion, God's omnipotence remains the paradox of free will and omniscience. This paradox highlights the tension between God's omniscience, which includes knowledge of all future events, and human free will, which implies the ability to make independent choices. If God knows all our actions before they happen, how can we be truly free? Thomas Aquinas, in his Summa Theologica, explains that God does not experience time as humans do, but rather exists in eternity, which allows him to know all events simultaneously without causing them to happen. God's knowledge is observational, not deterministic. This view is also adopted by Boethius in his Consolation of Philosophy, which states that God sees time as one eternal now, allowing humans to act freely in time while God knows all potential choices. In Islamic philosophy, Al-Ghazali discussed this paradox with the concept of qada and qadar, divine decree, where human will remains free, albeit within the framework of God's knowledge. This paradox reveals the complexity of the relationship between human will and divine arrangement, which recognizes human freedom without negating God's omniscience. Thus, free will remains intact without diminishing God's omniscient nature. The creation paradox. The creation paradox asks, why would a perfect, complete, and needless God create an imperfect world? In many theological and philosophical traditions, creation is considered an expression of the divine nature, especially love and creativity, rather than necessity. Thomas Aquinas explained that God created the world ex nihilo, from nothing, as an act of his free will. In this view, creation is a manifestation of divine goodness, in which that goodness abounds to his creation. Ibn Arabi, in the Islamic tradition, calls creation a tajalli, manifestation of God, for God to be known through his attributes. Neoplatonism adds the idea of emanation, where existence emerges as an emanation from the One, with the material world being the lowest level of existence. In the Hindu tradition, the concept of Lila, divine play, depicts the world as an arena where God interacts with his creation, not out of lack, but out of creative freedom. This paradox helps explain that the imperfections of the world are not evidence of God's shortcomings, but part of the divine plan that allows for free will, moral growth, and a deeper connection between the human and the divine. Creation becomes a reflection of infinite divine love. The problem of suffering and divine love. This paradox asks, if God is love, agape, why do suffering and pain exist in the world? Many religious and philosophical traditions try to explain the relationship between human suffering and divine love. In Christianity, suffering is often seen as part of the divine plan to bring humans closer to God. The cross of Jesus Christ became the ultimate symbol of God's love, where his suffering became the means of atoning for human sin. St. Augustine stated that God allows suffering to bring about a greater good, a principle known as felix culpa, lucky mistake. In Islamic philosophy, suffering is considered a test, fitna, given by God to test people's faith and raise their spiritual level. The Quran states that with hardship there is ease, Quran, Al-Inshirah, verse 6, indicating that suffering is temporary and part of Allah's greater plan. In Buddhism, suffering, dukkha, is the essence of life as taught in the Four Noble Truths. Suffering is not caused by divine forces, but by human attachment to the material world, and liberation from it can be achieved through the Noble Eightfold Path. This paradox teaches that suffering is not contrary to divine love, but is a means for spiritual growth, testing of faith, and enlightenment. It reveals that through suffering, humans can discover God's deeper love and purpose. The paradox of evil. This paradox questions how a benevolent God can allow evil and suffering to exist in the world. In philosophy and theology, this paradox is known as the problem of evil and has been one of the main issues in the discussion of the divine nature. The Summa Theologica explains that evil is not an independent entity, but the absence of good, privatio boni, just as darkness is the absence of light. God created a good world, but human free will allows choices that result in evil. Gottfried Leibniz, in his concept of theodicy, argued that this world is the best of all possible worlds, because only within a framework that allows free will, love, and true virtue can arise. In Islamic philosophy, Al-Ghazali discusses qadar, divine decree, and hikmah, divine wisdom, where evil is seen as a test for humans to understand goodness and get closer to God. In Buddhism, suffering, dukkha, is part of the law of causality, karma, and a tool for enlightenment. This paradox shows that the existence of evil does not deny the goodness of God, but reflects the complexity of creation in which freedom, moral growth, and spiritual realization can occur. Evil serves as a contrast to understand and appreciate divine goodness. The paradox of God's existence and unreachability. This paradox addresses how God can be both immanent, present in every aspect of creation, and transcendent beyond anything humans can comprehend. This paradox reflects the complex and multidimensional nature of God often described in various philosophical and religious traditions. In the Islamic tradition, the concept of tashbih, likeness, states that God is near and recognizable through his creation, while tanzih, incomparability, asserts that God is completely beyond everything that can be perceived. Al-Ghazali explains that God is present in everything without being part of the creation itself, maintaining a balance between reachability and unreachability. In Hindu philosophy, Advaita Vedanta teaches that Brahman is the reality inseparable from the world, but the world itself is an illusion, Maya, so Brahman remains beyond all manifestation. In Christianity, the manifestation of Jesus is considered a bridge between the immanent and the transcendent. This paradox shows that God is the source of all existence, present in every aspect of reality, but still unapproachable by human logic. It teaches that a relationship with God requires a balance between intellectual pursuit and spiritual experience. The paradox of unity and multiplicity. This paradox explores how God can be one, unity in his essence, yet appear in various manifestations and attributes, multiplicity. This paradox is found in many religious and philosophical traditions, describing the relationship between divine unity and the diversity of the created world. In Islamic theology, the concept of Tawhid affirms the oneness of God, while the Asma al-Husna, beautiful names of God, describe God's diverse attributes, such as compassion, ar-Rahman, and justice, al-Adl. Ibn Arabi explains that the world is a reflection of God's attributes, so diversity is merely an expression of a single essence. In Hindu philosophy, Advaita Vedanta teaches that Brahman is the one and undivided reality. The diversity of the world, Maya, is only an illusion, while all existence ultimately returns to the unity of Brahman. The Christian tradition used the concept of the Trinity to describe the unity of God present in three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. This paradox reflects that diversity is not opposed to divine unity, but is a way of understanding God's infinite essence. Unity is the source, and diversity is the expression, showing how the one God can be known through various manifestations in the universe. The life and death paradox. This paradox asks how life, which is considered immortal, can include death, which seems like the end of existence. Many philosophical and religious traditions see death not as a termination, but as an essential transformation in the cycle of life. In Hindu and Buddhist traditions, the concept of samsara explains the repeated cycle of birth, life, death, and reincarnation. Death is not the end, but rather a phase on the way to moksha, liberation, or nirvana, a state of no suffering. Yet in this view, life and death are illusions derived from attachment to the material world. In Christianity, death is seen as the path to eternal life. Jesus Christ, through his resurrection, showed that death is not the end, but the door to a new existence before God. In existentialist philosophy, as proposed by Heidegger, death gives meaning to life, as the awareness of death encourages humans to live authentically. This paradox shows that life and death are not opposites, but part of a larger transformative process. Death serves as a bridge to a higher reality, exposing the deep connection between the mortal and the eternal. The grace versus effort paradox. This paradox questions whether the attainment of salvation or liberation depends entirely on divine grace or human effort. In various spiritual traditions, these two elements are often considered complementary, despite their apparent contradiction. In Christianity, sola gratia theology emphasizes that salvation can only be achieved through God's grace, not human effort. However, theologians such as St. Augustine assert that while God's grace is the source of salvation, humans must respond to it through faith and action. In the Islamic tradition, the concept of tawakkul, surrendering to God, teaches that everything is God's will, but humans are still required to try and act in accordance with the Sharia. In Hindu philosophy, the teachings of Bhakti Yoga, the path of devotion, emphasize that God's grace is the main key to achieving moksha, liberation. However, through Karma Yoga, the path of action, and Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge, humans are expected to make active efforts to get closer to God. This paradox illustrates the harmonious relationship between grace and effort, where grace opens the door to salvation, but human effort is required to step through it. It teaches the importance of a balance between spiritual resignation and personal responsibility. The Hiddenness of God Paradox. This paradox asks, if God is omnipresent and the source of all things, why can't everyone feel or know him directly? This is known as Deus Absconditus, the hidden God in the Christian tradition, and is a recurring theme in philosophy and theology. In Christianity, Martin Luther used the term Deus Absconditus to describe that God deliberately hides himself so that people can approach him through faith, not sight. The Bible also states in Hebrews chapter 11, verses 1, that faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. In the Islamic tradition, the concept of ghaib, the unseen, asserts that God can only be recognized through his signs in creation, but God's essence remains unreachable. Al-Ghazali explains that God's unreachability is part of his greatness, but the signs of greatness are clear to those who contemplate with a pure heart. In Hindu philosophy, the concept of Maya describes the illusion that prevents humans from recognizing Brahman, ultimate reality. Enlightenment, moksha, can only be achieved by breaking the curtain of this illusion. This paradox suggests that God's unreachability is a means to preserve human freedom and test the true spiritual quest. God is hidden not because he does not exist, but to encourage a deeper connection through effort and faith. The Infinite and Finite Paradox. This paradox questions how the infinite can manifest in the finite. It is at the heart of metaphysical discussions in many religious and philosophical traditions, which try to explain the relationship between the infinite God and the finite world of creation. In the Hindu tradition, Advaita Vedanta teaches that Brahman is the infinite reality, while the material world, Maya, is merely an illusion. Everything that appears finite is ultimately a manifestation of the one Brahman. The concept of Saguna Brahman, Brahman with nature, explains how the infinite God can manifest in worldly form, while Nirguna Brahman, Brahman without nature, remains unreachable by human logic. In Islamic philosophy, the concepts of Tanzih, the incomparability of God, and Tashbih, the likeness of God, illustrate this balance. Ibn Arabi explains that the infinite God manifests himself through his attributes in creation, but God's essence remains beyond any form or limitation. In Christianity, Jesus Christ is considered the manifestation of the infinite God in finite human form. This illustrates the relationship between God's infinite essence and the limitations of the material world. This paradox teaches that the finite world is an expression of an infinite reality. It shows that God can be present in creation without losing his infinite nature, allowing humans to understand him through limited signs and experiences. The Duality and Nonduality Paradox. This paradox questions whether reality is dual, Dvaita, consisting of distinctions such as good versus evil, or God versus creation, or non-dual, Advaita, where all existence is a single entity with no fundamental differences. In the Hindu tradition, Advaita Vedanta states that all the diversity of the world is just an illusion, Maya. Brahman, the ultimate reality, is one and undivided. The apparent duality in human life, such as the existence of subjects and objects, is the result of ignorance, avidya. Enlightenment, moksha, occurs when a person realizes that there is no difference between himself and Brahman. In Mahayana Buddhism philosophy, the concept of shunyata, emptiness, describes that all things have no independent existence. The duality we see is merely a construct of the mind, and true reality is non-dual. In the mystical Christian tradition, Meister Eckhart mentioned that at the deepest level, there is no difference between God and the human soul, as both are united in essence. However, duality is necessary at the experiential level to help humans understand God. This paradox shows that duality is the way humans understand the complex world, while non-duality is the ultimate truth. The relationship between the two teaches that the experience of duality is the path to the realization of true unity. Duality and non-duality are not contradictory but complementary in man's spiritual journey. The time and eternity paradox. This paradox questions how an eternal God, aeternitas, who is beyond time, can interact with a world bound by time, chronos. It became an important theme in metaphysics and theology, which sought to explain the relationship between eternal reality and temporal existence. In Christian philosophy, Boethius, in his Consolation of Philosophy, explains that God resides in the eternal present, nunc aeternum, where the entire past, present, and future are simultaneously present. This perspective allows God to know all events without interfering with human free will, as God's knowledge is not bound by the order of time. In the Hindu tradition, the concept of Sanatana Dharma describes divine reality as eternal and unbound by time. Time is considered a manifestation of the illusory world, Maya, while Brahman is beyond the temporal dimension. Earthly time is valid only at the level of human experience. In Islam, the concept of Dahr, absolute time, asserts that Allah is Al-Awwal, the beginning, and Al-Akhir, the end, indicating that Allah encompasses all time without being limited by it. This paradox shows that time is a finite creation, while eternity is the dimension in which God exists. The relationship between time and eternity teaches that God not only transcends time, but is also present in time, allowing divine interaction with the temporal world without losing his eternal nature. The silence and revelation paradox. This paradox questions how the ineffable God can reveal himself to man through revelation. If God is beyond all words and concepts, how can humans know him? In Christian philosophy, the apophatic tradition, negative theology, represented by Dionysius Areopagita, emphasizes that God cannot be described in words. God can only be recognized through what he is not, as all human descriptions are limited. However, this tradition does not reject revelation. The Bible and Jesus Christ are regarded as revelations of God that allow humans to understand him within the limits of human experience. In Islam, the concept of tanzih, the incomparability of God, asserts that God is beyond anything that can be understood, while tashbih, the likeness of God, allows God to reveal himself through the Quran and the universe. Revelation is considered to be God's way of speaking to humans, although his essence remains unreachable. In Hindu philosophy, the Upanishads describe Brahman as neti, neti, not this, not that, asserting the infinity of ultimate reality. However, through Shabda Brahman, the divine word, Brahman reveals himself in the Vedas to guide humanity. This paradox teaches that revelation is the bridge between God's absolute silence and man's ability to know him. Revelation does not define God completely, but becomes a means for humans to experience a fraction of the infinite divine mystery. God's silence preserves his greatness, while revelation demonstrates his love and care for creation. God's personality paradox. This paradox discusses how the one God, unity, can have many attributes and expressions, multiplicity, without losing his essence as the one. This paradox is at the core of many theological and metaphysical traditions that seek to explain the relationship between God as the single source and the manifestation of his attributes in creation. In Islam, the concept of Tawhid affirms the oneness of God, but the Asma'ul Husna, beautiful names of God, describe God's attributes such as Ar-Rahman, the compassionate, and Al-Adl, the just. Ibn Arabi explains that these attributes are God's way of revealing himself to creation, but they do not change his one essence. All attributes originate from and return to the one divine essence. In Hindu philosophy, the concepts of Saguna Brahman, Brahman with nature, and Nirguna Brahman, Brahman without nature, explain how the infinite ultimate reality can manifest in the phenomenal world without losing his oneness. In Christianity, the doctrine of the Trinity describes God as one essence present in three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. These three expressions do not divide God, but reflect internal relationships within his oneness. This paradox shows that the diversity of God's nature and expressions is a way for humans to recognize the infinite aspects of the divine. This unity and diversity are not contradictions, but harmonious expressions of the infinite and unreachable God.